Hello, beautiful human. My name is Stella, and you are so welcome here. I'm glad that you're here and that you're listening to this little transmission. This is the first transmission in a 6-part practice that looks at sorrow and longing as a practice. So we'll start by thinking about what sorrow and longing actually means. So sorrow could be described as something that is very sad or painful, and longing might be described as a pining for, a wanting states to be different, longing for something that's happened in the past or someone that is part of the past, or longing for things to be different and for things to move forward in our lives, in our experiences. And longing for things to change in the future. And there isn't anything wrong inherently with any of our emotions. All of our emotions are valid, but some of them are more welcomed than others. And so if we think about what the opposite of longing might be, the opposite of longing might be described as being apathetic or indifferent. And sometimes when things are very painful, we might find that we experience a disassociation or a numbing because this is just a bit too much. This is a little bit too heavy to carry. And that cannot be useful to us too. And I'm really interested in these themes and ways in which we can find ease with our longing and with our sorrow. And it might be that we include grief of different sorts and kinds within these descriptors as well. And impermanence is the fact that states do not last forever. We're in a constant state of flux. If you look at nature around us, nature is constantly changing. Nature does not stay the same, and neither do we. We are constantly changing as well. Things come and things go, and sometimes that's really difficult. Often it's really difficult. And so it could be, a sign of impermanence is the fact that we grow old, or that relationships break down, or that we experience losses in all of the different ways, losing things, losing houses, losing jobs, losing loved ones. These are all things that we experience as part of our experience of impermanence, and yet we live in a world where everything is impermanent. And I'm going to share with you just a few words from John O'Donoghue. Blessed be the longing that brought you here and quickens your soul with wonder. May you have the courage to listen to the voice of desire that disturbs you when you have settled for something safe. May you have the wisdom to enter generously into your own unease, to discover the new direction your longing wants you to take. May the forms of your belonging in love, creativity, and friendship be equal to the grandeur and call of your soul. And these words really resonate with me. So rather than thinking of longing in terms of opposites, so opposite of longing might be a disassociation or apathy, and the opposite of sorrow might be joy. Perhaps these can all be sides of the same coin, the same whole, and longing perhaps has more to do with our ideas of belonging, or feelings of belonging, so ways that we can belong to ourselves and to each other, and also to the earth itself. And so the practice this week, if you're called to, is to create an altar for impermanence. And so an altar is a raised structure that is often used in religious ceremony or practice. It could be used for worship or prayer. And so we're thinking about an altar in a more secular sense. You can bring your spirituality or your religious practice into this if it's helpful for you. but you don't have to. So thinking of an altar as a visual anchor, so something that you can look upon over the next 6 weeks that reminds you of this holding of our sorrow and our longing in a way that is helpful and useful to us. And so if you're creating your anchor, your altar, you might select some objects that symbolize to you this impermanence that is all around us. So I'll give you some examples and maybe some of them resonate with you. So I'm often making altars and I often have a symbol for impermanence, passing and decay and death on my altars, which some might call a little bit macabre, but I personally find it helpful. So some objects that I might use are things like shells that have been really weathered by time and by the sea and by the sand. Or I might place on my altar a conker. I've got a conker there at the moment, and the conker is inside its little prickly shell, and the prickly shell is browning and it's starting to decay, really, starting to dry up. And this is a reminder to me that everything is changing. You could have a flower, a dried flower, a piece of bark, anything from the natural organic world that is helpful to you. You could also have a picture on there, maybe an ancestor or a loved one, or something that is more personal and symbolic to you. And I would be mindful as well about putting an object on the altar that is really tied up in your longing or your sorrow. So while it might be useful for a little while to have an object, I don't know, that an old lover gave you, something like this on your altar, is it going to be helpful for you to have it there for a long time? I don't know. I've also got the head of a raven, the skull of a raven, on one of my altars as well. Multiple different things, lots of different things that you could use. The idea is that you select some objects. Doesn't have to be many. It could just be one. It could be a couple. It could be a whole handful. It can be as big or as little as feels appropriate to you. And finding somewhere for you to put these objects that have meaning and are sacred to you in a place that you can see them. So you've got this visual anchor that you can look upon, and perhaps it might remind you of these themes, if these themes are themes that resonate and that you're open to working on. And the other thing about an altar or a visual anchor is that we want to maintain it. So if we just make an altar for whatever it is, I mean, this is for sorrow and for longing. It could be for something else. You could make an altar for anything. It could be a celebration. It could be passing of time. It can be anything at all. We want to tend to this altar. So we want to make this space that the objects are on sacred to us. So if the altar is covered in old crisp packets and dust and, your half of your sandwich and a book that you're half reading, it's not going to feel very sacred or special, right? So when you create this altar, thinking about maintaining it and maybe adding to it. So it might be over the 6 weeks that we're doing this journey together, you find an object, singular or plural, and you decide to add that to your altar, or maybe you take something away. So this is your space and there's no right or wrong. And of course, it's just an invitation. You don't have to, but you are invited to if it feels good in your body. And so I'm going to leave this here, beautiful people. And again, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And I look forward to our journey unfolding together.